my name is Jim Kalbach. There's my tweet handle. You can follow me on Twitter. Currently the head of customer success at a company called Mural, which was founded in Buenos Aires. I think some of you know about Mural. We used to be called Mural Lee, in case you're wondering what happened to the LY. In 2007, I wrote a book called Designing Web Navigation. And May of this year, 2016, I published a book called Mapping Experiences. And there's a topic in that book that I wanted to highlight and talk a little bit more about today, and that's about disruption, but also jobs to be done. So I have three main points that I'm going to make in my talk. I'm going to frame disruption and what that word can mean to us. It was one of the themes of the conference here today, and when I was asked to speak, I thought it would be great to kind of highlight what we actually mean when we say disruption, and then I'm going to focus on jobs to be done, and I want to try to make that as practical as possible, so I'm going to provide some examples at the end. So what is disruption? What does the word disruption mean? And I think there are two approaches to understanding disruption, and we've been using it today. Some of the speakers talked about disruption. It's also a theme of the conference, like I said, and I think when we're talking about disruption in a general sense, we're talking about a change in the status quo or some kind of disorder, right? We upend or we overturn something that previously existed. But there's also a very specific use of that word, and that's what I wanted to start out by talking about, this very specific use of the word disruption, particularly in business theory, what that means when we talk about a disruptive innovation or a disruptive technology. And we can explain it with this chart. It's a little bit complicated. There's books written about this, and I'm going to summarize it in about 5 minutes. So I realize that this is going to be a fairly quick description of what disruption means in the specific use of the term. If we think about a company or an offering that a company has over time, we can look at its performance. And by performance, I mean kind of the power or the capabilities that an offering has. And those are the two axes here, time and performance. In the middle is what we call market demand. So if we're looking at a given industry or a given market, there's the low-end demand, and these are the least demanding customers. And there's the high-end. They want more and more performance from a service or an offering. And what happens to a company over time is that they start out with a product or a service or an offering, and it grows in performance, right? This is natural. This is the natural course of a company and its offerings, that we want to improve it. We want to make it more and more powerful. We want to reach higher customers as well, too, right? So they're more demanding customers, and they're also usually willing to pay more money. So we want to increase and grow our business. This is natural, and we do this with incremental innovations. We add to our product and service, it becomes more powerful. We call this a sustaining innovation, right? So now we're a company, we're maybe more mature, and we're addressing the high end of the market demand. But what happens is the market isn't static, and it continues to change, and newcomers come into the market, right? And they often come in addressing the lower end of the market, right? And disruptive innovation, or disruptive business models, happens when the existing player ignores the newcomer. They ignore it because they say, great, you're coming in at the low end, I'm charging this price and my performance is higher, I have a full feature set and my service is well developed. You're coming in down there, I'm going to ignore you. But what happens down here? You can see that line is going up as well too. This company isn't going to stay down there. They're going to continue to increase their performance. And over time, the existing player becomes disrupted by the newcomer, right? So the interesting thing here about disruption in this very specific use of the word, in business disruption, it's actually about lower performance, right? We think, oh, disruptive technology is something that's, a new innovation in terms of technological innovation. But it's actually something that's cheaper, it's easier, it's quicker, it's more convenient, because we're addressing the low end, the low end of the market here. These are less demanding customers as well, too. So in a nutshell, this is what we talk about in the specific sense of the word disruption. Here are some examples, right? Encyclopedias disrupted by Wikipedia, bookstores by Amazon, CDs, MP3, film photography by digital photography. I'm just going to pause right there. When digital photography came out, the people who had film photography said, yeah, but the resolution is low, right? The professionals will always want the film photography, right? The first digital camera that I had 1 million megapixels, and that was like good at the time, right? But then what happened? You know, now we have 11 megapixel cameras. Everybody in this room probably has a 5 or 10 megapixel camera. And film photography got disrupted because they kind of ignored it or rationalized the newcomer away. Premium airlines, budget airlines, rental cars, car sharing, telephone by VoIP, so forth. Let me give you a specific example, if that wasn't clear. Who's heard of GoToMeeting? Have people heard of GoToMeeting? Okay, some. I used to work for GoToMeeting. In 2011, so this was a company that was founded in the early 2000s. It's web conferencing software, right? So if you know things like WebEx, it's a high-end web conferencing software. And in 2011, they made this announcement in a magazine called GigaOM, right? They're going to have high-definition webcams, right? So, right, they're incrementally increasing the performance of their product, right? They need to justify their high costs, right? Because this was about $50 a month. I think it was $30 a month when I left the company. So it's a high, you know, it's a premium product, and they need to justify that cost with more and more power. So now not only do we have webcams, we have high-definition webcams. Right, so there's this focus on technology, and that's part of the problem in disruption is that when that company gains maturity, they're focused on their own technology, they're focused on their own profits, and the decisions that they make try to optimize that. So this is 2011. How many people know Skype? Who knows Skype? Yeah, everybody, right? Right? So what was the competitive response from GoToMeeting to Skype, right? This is the beta version of Skype, by the way. This is one of the first versions of Skype, right? What was the competitive response from GoToMeeting? This is free. The quality's not that good, right? They're not targeting business customers. We're made for business situations, right? Businesses are willing to pay us a lot of money. We have high-definition webcams now, right? We can charge even more money. So they literally ignored Skype. Well, what happened to Skype? They developed their feature set. Audio got better. It's actually better than GoToMeeting, if you ask me. And then what happened in 2011, right at the time when GoToMeeting's launching high-definition webcams, Skype gets bought by Microsoft, who turns it into Skype for Business. Now Skype and GoToMeeting are on the same ground, even worse, right? Because now they got Microsoft behind it as well, too. So this is an example of a disruption. And again, disruption is about ignoring a newcomer to a field that's coming in at the low end. And at the low end, they're just really trying to satisfy a simple job. It's something that somebody's trying to get done, right? They do the job good enough, right? And we can't talk about disruption theory. Everything that I just told you really comes from a famous Harvard business professor called Clayton Christensen. And he wrote these two books, the first of which is probably one of the most important in modern business theory, called The Innovator's Dilemma. And he researched over many years, he researched this dynamic that happens in businesses where the existing players ignore the new players and the reasons why they do that. It's actually a lot more complicated than I just described, so this is kind of the short version of disruption. And he calls this a dilemma. And it's a dilemma because the business needs to make decisions in order to grow and in order to increase its profits. But this decision-making process ignores the low end, and it ignores just getting the job done in a good enough way. So what he talks about in his second book, this came out in, I think, 1997, and this was 2003 or so, The Innovator's Solution, what he talks about is the way to overcome disruption in this specific use of the term that I'm talking about here. The way to overcome this is to focus on the consumer's goal, the customer's goal, to focus on their need. And he calls this the job to be done. And what happens in these mature companies is that, as I mentioned, they get caught up in their own operational efficiency. They get caught up in their own maximizing their profit margins and things like that. And they forget about what the customer's trying to get done. Right? So Skype comes in and they get the job done. They don't have high-definition webcams. That's okay. Right? The low end doesn't need that. So chapter 3 of this book, The Innovator's Solution, focuses on this concept of called jobs to be done. And this is really about a goal. This is about what people are trying to get done. And the way to fight disruption is to think about the market, to think about customer needs. So the concept of jobs to be done, just to describe it very briefly, it's not a task analysis. Sometimes people think jobs to be done equals task analysis. It's much more than that, and we're going to talk about that later. It's really about a goal and a progress towards that goal. It goes well beyond demographics. We're not talking about demographics here, and we're not talking about solutions either, right? Because a job to be done can be solved with many different solutions. It's really about taking a step back and looking at what people are trying to get done. And the point that Clayton Christensen makes is that it shows causality. Right? Demographics don't show causality. Nobody ever bought anything because of their age and their income or how big their company is. Right? They buy things because they're trying to get something done. And it actually reverses the equation to some degree. Companies want to sell products, but from the customer standpoint, from the consumer standpoint, they use the term hire, that somebody's trying to hire a service or a product to help them solve a problem. So when we talk about jobs to be done, we're really talking about problem solving or progress towards a goal. And I thought this was pretty cool when I first came across this as a designer. This should all ring true for you guys. You should be nodding your head and say, yeah, let's look at the market from the customer's standpoint. But this comes from the business side of things, from academic business leaders, from people in business. So the first point I want to make, I really only clicked that once. The first point that I want to make, at the core of disruption, again, this specific definition of disruption, is a realization that opportunity, right, business opportunity and fighting disruption comes from understanding the jobs that people want to get done. That's Clayton Christensen's recommendation for fighting disruption. I thought that was pretty cool when I kind of realized that, particularly for designers. So for all the theory and for all the elaborate descriptions and research that went into this, there's not a real good practical way to apply this. The theory's there kind of without the practice, which is fine. If you're Clayton Christensen, right, he operates in the stratosphere. He's way up here, and he consults the biggest CEOs in the world on where they should play and how they should strategically react. But what I wanted to do was take this notion of jobs to be done and operationalize it and make it a little more tangible for us. So I came up with this model, and this is actually only the second time that I've ever shown this in a presentation. But I want to propose a practical model for thinking about jobs to be done. And it has these 6 elements. First, the 3 different dimensions of a job to be done. As I mentioned, it's not about task analysis. There is a functional job, so if I'm trying to get something done, if I have a goal, I can think about the functional job, and that's the task or the activity, but there's also an emotional job. How do I feel when I'm doing that? And there's a social job. What's the perception of me in a social context? Right, so when we're talking about jobs to be done, we're actually talking about the functional job, the emotional job, and the social job as well, too. Typically, we express a job to be done in terms of its functional job, and that's why I think it gets confused with task analysis. But it's actually much more than that. Emotions play a role in jobs to be done, theory and practice. On the other dimension, it's really about looking at the circumstance, because the job that I'm trying to get done, the goal that I'm trying to reach, is also driven by my circumstance, right? So you think about the situation up at the top. The motivation, this is another way of saying the problem that I'm trying to overcome or the trigger for achieving that goal, as well as the desired outcome, right? So this is a model based on, and I'll show you some examples coming up, but based on what I've read about it, what I've tried to practice, this is a model that when we talk about jobs to be done, how can we describe jobs to be done in a more practical way? I think it's made up of these 6 elements. And I have an example, right? So we talk about hiring, we talk about pulling products into our lives to solve a problem. Let's think about a keyless door lock and think about those 6 dimensions. Right? The functional job is I want to control access to my home. The emotional job is feel safe and secure, and the social job is to let visitors in, keep strangers out. Right? So I can think about the job to be done in those 3 ways. Now notice that none of these have actually a solution in there as well, too. I can control access to my home with a regular key. I could hire a bodyguard or a guard in front of me. There's lots of ways that I can solve that problem. But what jobs to be done is trying to predict if somebody would hire this particular solution, given the circumstance or the situation, right? So this is for private homeowners, right? I rent right now, so I'm probably not going to install a keyless lock because I don't own the front door and those kinds of things. So we talk about private homeowners, and they need to let people in and out during the day. So their motivation is really, the problem they're trying to solve is one of selective access, right? With a keyless lock, I can let people in and out, I can change the code, those kinds of things as well, too. And some of the desired outcomes might be to maximize my options for entry and exit, to reduce the chance of intruders, to increase a sense of security. For any job to be done, there might be a dozen or even 2 dozen, depending on how we frame the job to be done. There might be many desired outcomes as well, too. So that's just an example of applying that framework that I just suggested to describe a job to be done in a predictive way. Would somebody hire this to do that job for them? I just published a blog post on my blog where I summarize this as well, too. I want to zoom in a little bit just on desired outcomes to show how this can be predictive and how jobs to be done thinking, and really what I'm talking about here is a way of thinking, not a method. I'm not talking about a method or a process that you can go through. It's really a lens or a way to frame seeing problems. And I just wanted to zoom in on desired outcomes as a way to think about how we might predict or find opportunities in a market. So this is what we call a desired outcome statement. They always start with a verb that shows direction, right? If I have a goal, that means I'm here and I want to move over there, and I want to either increase something or decrease something. So we can express these desired outcomes with either minimize, reduce, or lower as the first verb, or maximize, increase, or raise. So when you think about these statements, they always start with one of those verbs. There might be some more, but it's usually one of those 6. And then there's a unit that I want to move up and down. I want to maximize my ability to allow visitors in. And then sometimes there's a qualifying statement during the day as well, too. So for any job that we can describe, we can derive these desired outcome statements using this pattern. And guess what? Guess where this comes from? This comes from observing people. This comes from qualitative research, right? So these are things that we're really good at, I think. Again, the theory comes from the business literature as well, too. So that's qualitative. I can generate these jobs to be, desired outcome statements. But then there's a technique, a really cool technique, where you can then survey. You can put these desired outcome statements in a survey and try to quantify where opportunity might be. And what you do is you survey people against this statement. You have 2 questions. How important is this desired outcome for you, and how well is it currently being satisfied? Not necessarily with my solution, but in general. Right? So if you ask those 2 questions, what you end up with for all of your desired outcome statements, sorry, oh, I'm pressing the wrong button, that's my fault. I just asked about importance and satisfaction. I can plot now my desired outcomes on a graph. So I've actually quantified where opportunity might lie, and it lies right there, right? What we want to do as an organization in order to fight disruption and in order to grow, right, we want to find the jobs that are more important to people, but they're currently being less satisfied. So when we talk about opportunity from a jobs to be done lens or jobs to be done thinking, we're not talking about market opportunity in terms of market share or penetration or things like that. We're talking about where's the opportunity with solving someone's need, helping them solve a problem. And I think that's pretty cool too. This particular method, sorry, let me go back here. This particular method that I just described is outlined in a book by Tony Olwick called What Customers Want. He also talks about it in this article, Turn Customer Input into Innovation. And he talks about how to generate these desired outcome statements, how to do the methodology of looking at where opportunity lies. And I had the pleasure of doing this method on a couple of projects that I worked on in the past as well, too. So jobs to be done theoretically and practically can show causality. They can show why people might behave in a way that they behave in terms of their purchase behavior and adopting or acquiring our services. So the second point I want to make is that jobs to be done gives designers a way of capturing insight that leverages our skills. I think it's very qualitative. I think it's looking at the market from the customer's perspective. I think that's something that we're particularly good at. But it's not to, what I'm talking about here is not to improve necessarily interface design, although that's part of it as well too. But I think we can contribute to a broader business conversation as well too. That we can help businesses see the market in a different way that points to customer-centric opportunities as well. So I want to show some examples and practical ways that you can apply what I was just talking about. Again, jobs to be done is not a process. I mean, maybe there will be a method out there. There are actually different methods out there. I just showed you one from Tony Olwick. There are other people that have been working with jobs to be done for a while. And I think it's something that we're hearing more and more. Some of you have probably heard the term before. Who's heard of jobs to be done before I gave my talk, right? Some of you. And, you know, it's not necessarily new. I just want to dispel that myth right now, right? It's not new. We've been talking about this for 20 years. And if you really look at what jobs to be done theory and practice is telling us, you might say, hey, this is human-centered design. Or Alan Cooper would say, isn't this just goal-driven design? And the answer might be, yeah, it's actually not new. It's a new package, and it's a new way of thinking about a business problem. I think the interesting thing for me is that this comes from the business community. And our business partners, I predict our business partners are going to be talking about this more and more. So I just want to make sure that we're all aware of this new trend going on. And it's related to disruption. And I think our skills, I think we're better suited to work with jobs to be done than some people working with it right now from the business perspective. So I encourage us to understand this and jump right in. If it feels like you're doing the same things with a different label, that might be the case, and that's okay. But here are some different ways that I think we can apply jobs to be done, right? We can use it as a way, again, a lens to understand the market, right? The way to gather insight. But also then to apply it in order to come up with solutions and design for the market, to speak to the market as well, too. And then finally, to define or redefine a market, to ask the ultimate question. And I just want to show some examples for each of those. So number one, understanding the market. This was a project that I was working on about 8 years ago, or maybe more now. I was working for a legal publisher, and we were trying to understand how small law firms in Germany, where I used to live, do new business. How does a small law lawyer get new customers in? And we were trying to understand that problem. And at the time, I was reading about jobs to be done, and I thought, how can I capture that? How could I use the jobs to be done lens in order to structure my research? I went out and I talked to a dozen or more lawyers in Germany, and I captured my research like this. I realize you can't read this. I'm going to zoom in on it in a second. But basically, what I did was I caught all of the functional, emotional, and social jobs here. And then in the middle, I have these desired outcomes here in the brown. At the top of that column, or at the top of this space, is the job to be done. And then at the very top here is what I call the value. And one of the problems, the reason why I'm showing this, is that one of the problems that you have when you start talking about jobs to be done, it's hard to determine at what level of granularity are you talking about. Now again, I don't think it's task analysis, so I don't think it's about doing a specific task. I think it's about a goal. But it's also not about a high-level need. Right? I want to be happy in my job. That's not a job to be done. That's a need, right? Or I want to be a successful lawyer, right? That's too high level. So one of the problems of working in jobs to be done is what level of granularity do I zoom in on? Let me just zoom in on one section here, right? So we see improve reputation there. That's the job to be done. And then I captured some of the desired outcomes here, so I want to increase my exposure in regular media. That's what I kind of summarized. That's a pattern that I found in qualitative research that I summarized as a desired outcome. But down here, these are all of the functional, social, and emotional jobs as well, too. Again, categorized hierarchically. So they teach, they volunteer, they publish, they post online forums, they get a high-profile case. This all rolls up into achieving that job to be done. But you'll see up here, become a successful lawyer. That's more of a value, right? So it's really around in this middle level that when we talk about jobs to be done, it's about achieving a goal or the progress towards that goal as well, too. And if you look at this diagram and you know the technique of mental models, right? So Indy Young wrote a book called Mental Models in 2008, and I know some of you know that technique. You know, she writes in this book, mental models give a deep understanding of people's motivations and thought processes, along with the emotional and philosophical landscape in which they are operating, right? So she's talking about emotions, tasks, social jobs, the landscape in which they are operating. That's the circumstances that I was talking about as well, too. So I really think if you look at mental model diagrams, it's really a map of the jobs to be done as well, too. So again, we're already doing this kind of thing, and jobs to be done is just a new lens. It's a different lens coming from a different literature and a different group of people as well too. Here's an example. This was at GoToMeeting. I used to work for GoToMeeting, and we had done some research, and we captured that research in a mental model diagram. Here on the top, these are all the jobs to be done, and then we mapped our feature set and all of our capabilities back to that. We brought this into a workshop, and we're able to facilitate a conversation with our stakeholders. And notice here, it doesn't say, how do I get higher definition webcams, right? It's how do people work? More specifically, it was more around collaboration. How do people collaborate? We were trying to get the company to think broader than just their one particular solution. Another example is designing. How can we use this then, jobs to be done, this technique, this model that I'm talking about, how can we use that to help us design better products? A guy named Alan Clement talks about replacing the user story with the job story. Most of us know about agile development and this thing called user stories, right? He says, don't express your user stories as typically written, but rather think about the job to be done, and he calls these job stories. Right? And you notice here, it's one of those fill in the blank type of sentences. When I'm in this situation, I want to, that's my motivation, so that I can, that's my desired outcome, my expected outcome. So these job stories then become something that we can leverage our insight of the market and what people are trying to get done as a way to help us design better products and services, particularly within agile development. And this is what my esteemed colleague, Diletta Olivieri, does when she does design sessions. I think Stella is here. I don't know. Some of you probably know her there on the left. This is Mural, the company that I work for. We're an online whiteboard. And when they run design sessions, one of the first things that she does is says, what are the jobs to be done that we're working towards? And to be honest with you, I've been in lots of design sessions where we designers forget that as well too. And we get wrapped up in buttons and flows and technology as well too. So you can see here, this is using the job story template, right? When I'm in this situation, I want to do this so that I can reach this outcome. And those are always there, right on the exercise, right? So everybody can see those job stories. So this then becomes a way that we can take real-world observation and use it as a tool that we can design better products with. The third thing I think we can do with jobs to be done is help us speak to the market differently. When I was working with GoToMeeting, this might be something that the marketing team might come up with, right? Our conference software features high-definition video with the best resolution, right? Focus on technology, right? That's what those existing players want to do. They want to focus on more and more on their technology. If we think about the job to be done, what are you trying to do? You're trying to connect with your remote colleagues, right? And actually, when you phrase it this way, with true-to-life video, you're like, does true-to-life video help me connect better with my colleagues? Not really. So I think when we think about jobs to be done in disruption, right, there's this focus on technology, and then when you express things in terms of the job to be done, you might realize that high-performing, capability that pushes you towards the higher end of the market actually isn't a job that people are trying to get done. It's a feature that we think is good for the market. So jobs to be done is really about thinking about the market from the market's perspective. This is how people see why they're hiring a product or a service. Here's another example from Mural. In my role as customer success, I'm also in charge of our help center. And earlier this year, we were rewriting all of our help articles. And I thought, well, how am I going to structure this in a way that's not technologically specific? So I thought about the framework that I just showed you, the model of jobs to be done. So we can see our help center up here. We're in the topic of adding content, and we have paste from spreadsheets and lists. Right? So that's our functional job. They always start with a verb as well, too. So all of our help articles start with a verb. The next thing is increase your ease of working with content across documents. Right? I started with one of those increase or decrease verbs. That's our desired outcome, or why you would want to read this article. Here's a little bit more context. When is this handy? I go back to the functional job because it's a help article, so you want to see the steps of the functional job. And then we end up with the emotional job. It's magic. Impress your friends, right? We talk about the social job at the end. So this now becomes a way, it's a checklist for us to format the content. I don't know if this makes a better article or not from the customer's perspective, but it's certainly something that we can use to craft content and to speak to the market in a different way, right? So again, this isn't a method. I'm not talking about a process, step 1, step 2, step 3. I'm really just thinking about a way, it's a lens for us to see different problems in a different way. And then finally, number four is we can actually ask the ultimate question: what business are we in? Who are our competitors? Right? Which is sometimes a tough question for designers to ask of their managers and people above them. But there's this great quote that really, when I read this sentence, a lot of things clicked. This is Scott Cook. He's the founder and CEO of Intuit. And in the US, Intuit is the leading tax software provider. Right? They provide software so that people can get their taxes done at the end of the year. And here's what he said: the greatest competitor in tax software wasn't the industry, it wasn't other pieces of tax software. It was the pencil. It was the pencil. The pencil is a tough and resilient substitute, yet the entire industry overlooked it. So he's really talking about, let's look at the market from its own perspective, from the jobs that people are trying to get done. I'm trying to do my taxes, right? I got all this data, I got forms, I got things printed out everywhere. I have to do calculations and sub-calculations and carry the one number from the one column over to the other column, right? So I have lots of different jobs to be done. I can use a pencil to do some of that, right? Right? So from my perspective, yes, I have tax software in front of me, but I'm not necessarily comparing the ease of getting my job to be done with that tax software against other tax softwares. I'm just trying to use anything that's available to me to get that job done. So this really helps us really kind of reframe who our competitors are as well, too. Here's another example of that. Alan Clement, I mentioned him earlier. He came up with the idea of a job story. He just published a book recently called When Coffee and Kale Compete. Now, I was told before I came up here that kale is, I think it's pronounced Kale. Do you guys know what that is? It's like a green leafy thing, like spinach. It has a lot of vitamins and minerals. It's a total fad in the US right now. It's like trendy. If you want to be trendy, just put kale on it, right? It's trendy. But what he was talking about was it was actually an anecdotal story of someone who he was talking to who wanted to switch from coffee to kale drinks in the morning, right? What's the job that both of them solve, right? Trying to give you energy in the morning, right? So does coffee and kale compete? Yeah, they compete. In that moment, they compete as well, too. So the idea of thinking in terms of jobs to be done can actually help us think about who are our competitors and what business are we actually in? Who are we trying to compete against as well, too? And he's got some really good descriptions of jobs to be done in general. It's about a struggle. That's the way he frames it. A job to be done is about looking at the individual struggle in trying to reach that goal. That's what we call a job to be done. So I think jobs to be done can offer a practical lens. Again, it's not a process or a method. I'm not talking about step one or step two. I'm really just talking about a model that I presented with the 6 different elements. It's a lens that we can view various aspects of our organization. Because I don't think customer centricity comes from someone with a customer experience title or from an interaction designer. I think we need to make our entire business customer centric. And jobs to be done is just a lens. It's another way to help us do that, I think. And it helps us, I think, shift the view from what I call the inside out to the outside in. One of the problems with companies that get disrupted, right, these players that reach maturity and have their performance higher and they're reaching the higher markets, is that they're seeing themselves from the inside out. They're looking at their market from the inside out. What's our core competency? How can we charge more money, right? Why else would GoToMeeting make a high-definition webcam, right? Because they're trying to add more and more power. That's them talking to themselves. But if we look at ourselves and our markets and our products from the outside in, from the customer's perspective, I think that's what jobs to be done helps us do. And it's not just a theory that Clayton Christensen can apply at the highest level of business consulting. I think there are some practical applications of it that I've tried out. I think if you go out and read Alan Clement and Tony Olwick and things like that, you'll see that people have been working in this field as well too. So I really just wanted to present to you the idea of jobs to be done, how it might be relevant to your work, and how we might continue this conversation forward. Here are my 3 points summarized in one sentence. That surviving disruption, the specific use of the word disruption, requires a focus on jobs to be done. And I think that's something that's relevant to us, right, if you apply it in practical ways. And I think that's an opportunity for us as well, too, right? Everybody talks about, I was having a talk with Sue Cooper at dinner about design having a seat at the table, right? Now we have a seat at the table. We have to be able to have different types of conversations with different types of people now. And I think that's what Jobs to be Done ultimately helps us do, among other things. I just wanted to end with one more final quote from Theodore Levitt, another famous business professor. And this was back in the 50s and 60s. I'm not quite sure when he actually made this specific quote, but it was actually the inspiration for Clayton Christensen to come up with the idea of Jobs to be Done. And he said, people don't want a quarter-inch drill, they want a quarter-inch hole. Right? And I think what this really reflects is, as companies, we're trying to sell people products, but they're looking to solve a problem and pull solutions into their lives as well, too. So what he's telling us is to think about things from the outside in, not from the inside out. So, Dankeschön.